Hey, readers. It is time for your book break. I'm Kaylin Farneth, your host, coming to you live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have schools from all over the world joining us today, including John T. Baker Middle School in Maryland, Gwinnett County Middle Schools in Georgia, and Indian Hills in Kansas. I couldn't be more excited to introduce today's author. She is a two-time winner of the Newbery Medal, revolutionized dystopian literature for young adults, and continues to inspire many with her passionate words. Please welcome Lois Lowry. Lois, it's an absolute honor to be talking with you today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm in Maine, where the trees are changing from green to bright yellow as we speak.
Love that. Well, shout out to all of our schools in Maine. Today, we are focusing on your dystopian novel, The Giver, which is iconic. I read it in school, it's still being read in schools. Can you tell our readers a very quick summary about The Giver if they haven't read it?
A quick summary of a complicated book. It's about a 12-year-old boy, sometime in the future, not too distant, who suddenly realizes that the life he has known is not actually completely true.
Mm-hmm.
That's too short a summary.
No, that's perfect. It keeps us engaged and wanting more. So we have a video submission question that everyone has been dying to know, and I got tons of questions that related to this. Let's see our first question from Eliza.
My name is Eliza. I'm from North Branch Middle School in Afton, Virginia, and I was just wondering what inspired you when you came up with the idea of The Giver?
Thank you for that question. I've heard that question before, and I've answered it so many times, and sometimes I give different answers because books come from so many different places, primarily, of course, the imagination of the author. But I will tell you that what happened was it was time for me to write a new book. I'd already written lots. New one was published, and it was time for me to write the next one, and I didn't have an idea yet. But I went to visit my parents, who were then still alive, and my father was in his 90s, and he was in an assisted living place. And my brother and I had prepared a photograph album of family photographs, and I would sit with Dad and look at the photographs. And one was of two blonde little girls, and he smiled and he said, "There you are with your sister." And then he said, he looked a little embarrassed. He said, "I can't remember her name." And I said, "Her name was Helen, Dad. She was named for her grandmother." And he said, "Whatever happened to her?" And I had to say, "She died, Dad." And he had forgotten that, repressed it. Who knows where it had gone inside his brain, that sad memory. And I began to think as I was on my way home, and this is what a writer often thinks, what if? I thought, what if there were a way we could have people get rid of any memories they had of things from their past that made them sad or scared? Because my father had been perfectly happy looking at my sister until I said, "She died, Dad," and he realized that. And I thought, well, that would be interesting. Would it be a good thing? And by the time I got home, I had to fly. I was on a plane, thinking about that on the plane. By the time I got home, I thought, that's going to be my next book, about people who had found a way to do that, to control and manipulate human memory in an attempt to make life be happier and more comfortable. That was what began The Giver.
Wow, incredible. Actually, some of our students had seen some of your interviews talking about how your dad and your sister had inspired The Giver. And Jordan from a school in San Antonio asked, did the history of being part of a military family also help to inspire some of the rules you created in the community and, kind of that world?
Yeah, my father was a career Army officer. That's why I was born in Honolulu, because he was stationed there. That's why I lived in Tokyo, because Dad was stationed there. But every place I lived on an Army post was a little like the community in The Giver. I didn't realize that when I was writing it, but when I read what I had written afterwards, I thought, oh, that sounds familiar. Small place, very safe, very comfortable, lots of rules, uh, and everything is weirdly alike. Houses are alike, as they are in the world where Jonas lives. My father happened to be a fairly high ranking officer, so we always had a big house in a row of big houses. And then over there would be the smaller houses, all alike. Everything just terribly well organized.
Mhm.
And the feeling was one for me as a kid of enormous safety and comfort, but also that it was a little weird because I would go to a school in a town that was not part of the Army post. And I realized those kids, my friends, I would visit them at their houses. Their lives were different. They weren't as well organized and as weird as my community was.
Hmm. And so we've got some of your dad and your sister and the world you were living in, and American Heritage Schools was interested. Did you use some of yourself in creating the characters or the book in The Giver?
You know, I've written a lot of books for young people, I think now around 50, and each one, with two exceptions, has a main character who is young, who is a kid. And that kid, whether it's a male or female or 8 years old or 14 years old, that's always me as a kid.
Mm.
Because when I go back and begin to write, I put myself into the mind and heart of the main character. I don't know how I do that. It's kind of magical, I think. I go back in my own memory and I look out through the eyes that I saw from when I was 8 or 10 or 12.
That is, it is so magical. It feels like we learn so much about ourselves, I think, through reading these characters too. And it is so beautiful. Now, The Giver really was this like revolutionary book for its time. Adolf Schreiber Hebrew Academy of Rockland was curious if any specific literature inspired you to explore the dystopian world, especially for young adults.
I majored in English and literature at college. And I remember I'm now 87 years old. So I went to college when I was 17. So that's 70 years ago. But I remember English classes requiring me to read books that still exist and are still used in schools. 1984, Brave New World. Those were classic dystopian books. But I've only discovered this in recent years. When I wrote The Giver, it was the first dystopian book for kids. Now there are zillions because The Giver became so popular. And there are many other good ones now, but The Giver was the first one for young people. I will say that as a reader growing up, I never had any interest in science fiction or fantasy. And The Giver has been called a combination of those two things. I liked realistic fiction, I liked historical fiction. And then suddenly, because of my imagination and my father and all of that, I found myself writing a book that was, whoops, what is this? Is this science fiction? I don't even like science fiction. You'll notice that I left out any science, and I often get letters from kids saying, how exactly did they do this or that? And I have to tell them, I have no idea.
That is interesting. I never thought about that. The fact that there is a lot of the like details with the science left out.
Yeah.
I love dystopian though. So this definitely opened up my world to dystopian literature. And The Giver is so nuanced and complex and has so many little details, even in such a like, a very manageable text. Parkway Northeast Middle School in Missouri asked, how do you keep all those little details in the front of your mind and then wrap them around to connect them in ways that are so meaningful and clever? And I mean, it just seems like mind blowing how everything ties together at the end.
Well, when I'm working on a book, I become very absorbed in it, and everything in my real day to day life sort of becomes secondary. I enter the world of the book and become part of it myself. And so those details become part of my everyday life. With a book like The Giver, though, I do remember that when I began to perceive this community, which I was making up as I went along, uh, that it was so different from what we know today. I actually did get out a pen and paper beside my, I started to say my computer. The Giver was the first book I wrote on a computer. Up to that, it was typewriters. Kids don't even remember typewriters. But at any rate, I got paper and pen, and I made up the rules of the community so that I would be consistent and wouldn't. There is one little mistake in the book. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But I didn't want to make any mistakes. I never want to. And so I did have those cheat sheets by my desk when I was working.
Oh, well, see, that is reassuring to know that even Lois Lowry can make mistakes, because sometimes we beat ourselves up over that. And it's not always perfect, but perfectly imperfect.
That's right.
Did you know that this is where the story was going to go? Like, did you have that idea, or did you kind of discover it along the way?
I set out, and this is true of every book I write. I set out knowing the main character quite well,
Mhm.
becoming the main character, and I know the setting. And I know that there's something that character needs or wants, is going to aim toward, but I don't have any idea what that journey is going to be like or what the end will consist of. So it's exciting for me going day by day. I discover things as the reader does. I think it would be easier, perhaps, to, to have a whole set of index cards or an outline, and then I would know everything. But if I did that, if I sat down and wrote the outline of a book, then when I began to write the book, I would be bored because I would have used my imagination in the outline, and then I don't want to do it again and have to embellish. I like to, I like the excitement of making it up as I'm writing it.
Oh, interesting. How did you come up with like the different roles in the community?
That was part of my list making, I suppose. The roles that in the book, this is not a spoiler, this happens early in the book. The boy goes to the ceremony where 12-year-olds are told what their role as an adult is going to be in the community. And the roles are pretty much roles that we have today, with the exception of one, and that is the, what did I call them? The ones who have the babies.
Oh, yes.
What are they called? Birth mothers. Birth
Yes.
mothers. Yes. We don't have that role in our society. Of course, we have moms and people producing children, but it's very different from the way it's done in the book. So that was one of the things that I came up with as a futuristic, weird sort of part of that community. But others of the kids are assigned the role of engineer or scientist, or yeah, the mom is a lawyer or a judge of some sort. Those are the same roles that we see in our own families now. They're just perhaps slightly futurized.
Right. And actually, in our post talk lesson, kids will be able to kind of explore how our world compares to The Giver or other dystopian novels and kind of see that intersection.
Yeah.
I think is cool. Rolette Middle Academy in Florida did ask, though, why 12 years old? Why was that the significant number, or did it just, come to you?
It's interesting to me that when they made a movie of The Giver, they decided to make the kids older. And they told me the reasons, and we can talk about that if we have time. But in answer to your question, 12 is one of my favorite ages. 11, 12, 13. I have a new book out. The main character is 11. Jonas is 12, turns 12 in the book. My very first book, main character was a 13-year-old girl. I love that age as a subject for writing about because it can be so many different things.
Mm.
A 12-year-old is still, sorry, 12-year-olds, if you don't like this, but I'm saying a 12-year-old is still a child in many ways. At the same time, a 12-year-old is also an adult or the beginnings of an adult. And so there are so many decisions to be made, so many choices at that age, and so many things to worry about, as I did when I was 12. It's just a very, to me, a fascinating age to write about.
So interesting. I do see that. That's like the big shift into the preteen age and
Yeah.
thinking that you are so mature and absolutely. Now we have to ask, a lot of readers were curious though. Did you write The Community and The Giver as where you thought society would end up, or like other dystopian novels, kind of like a warning to society?
A cautionary tale, that's called. I guess it is a kind of warning. Um, and as we look ahead and think about and imagine what the world might be like next year, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, there are all sorts of answers, and we don't know which is correct. So it presented one possibility, but it did so with the idea that if you look carefully at this, you see that they made mistakes. You see that they made bad choices. They made compromises. And in that sense, it's a warning. The kids who are reading The Giver today, not very long in the future, will be the ones who decide what the world is like. And so one hopes, I hope, we all hope that they will be alerted to the dangers of making compromises the way the governments of this book had done.
Mhm. Absolutely. I could talk for days about all of the little details, the symbolism, the similes, metaphors. Maybe I should have written in and asked you to label all of the similes and metaphors. I know you've gotten that question a lot. Gracelyn has a question about some symbolism in the characters. Let's watch.
Hi, I'm Grayson from Fairstown Middle School in Kentucky, and I was wondering, why did you make the community with dark hair and dark eyes, but you made the receiver with light eyes?
Okay, I'm going to give you a visual aid here. Look carefully. I don't know if you can see. I have a very light blue eyes. I always have. My family was Norwegian, and that's typical of Scandinavian people that they have blue eyes. All of my children have blue eyes. And so I'm very partial to blue eyes. And when I wanted some specific characteristic for my main character, I decided to give him that. So it was a very personal reason. I didn't think of any particular symbolism, although I'm not sure it says this in the book. It might. I haven't reread the book in a long time. But the baby, of course, has blue eyes also. And maybe it says somewhere that looking into those eyes, you get a feeling of things beyond, things you don't know, depth. I'm sure that brown-eyed people are very wonderful people as well, and special in their own way. But to me, blue eyes are something kind of magical.
I find that so interesting because I think when I read it, I did, I've always been instilled that everything the writer does is purposeful and a choice. And so maybe thinking that, he has light eyes because he can see beyond, or it's different, more color or something compared to the darker eyes. So maybe we've, as a society, that's us, connecting with the text in a different way or adding on extra layers of depth.
I want to add one little detail though about light eyes. When they did make a movie, they decided against using the light eyes because they had a lot of child characters and babies, and they would have had to use, what are they called? Not artificial eyes.
Contacts.
Yeah. And it would have been dangerous to do that with babies. And so they just ignored the whole eye color thing.
Hey, creative liberty, I guess. But the characters and the story, I mean, it is so profound. I mean, like I said, readers have been reading this since 1993. It is still in curriculum today. And we got a lot of questions talking about how those characters connect and stay relevant. So let's see the first one from Wes and Bernita.
Hi, I'm Wes.
Hi, I'm Bernita.
We're from Ridgeview Junior High in Pickerington, Ohio.
We were wondering, The Giver has continued to be used in schools for many generations. How do you create novels that withstand the changes in the world and is still relevant to readers?
You know, when I write a book, the giver happens to be set in a future time, and so I could make that whatever I wanted it to be. But when I write a book set in now, um, I find that I haven't always been careful about this, but I try not to put into the book things that are current vernacular. Words that kids say that are kind of slang that
Sure.
a year from now won't be relevant. The kind of slang that I used as a teenager sounds very dated and obsolete and stupid now. So I try to avoid those things because I want a book to be able to last for some years. A funny thing is happening now, though, with writing for all writers. I think this is true. You have to deal with the technology of today, the cell phones and the computers. I have books written several years ago. I mean, The Giver doesn't fall in this category because it's set in the future, but I have realistic books written several years ago, but kids don't have cell phones. And if a kid picks up that book, they might enjoy the character and the plot, but it would start to feel strange because why isn't this kid on his phone? So I try to make it relevant, but nothing. I put nothing in that will become dated, and sometimes that's hard. Book like The Giver, it's not hard because I could make it however I wanted since it's set in the future.
Sure. That's interesting and great advice for readers who might be wanting to explore writing their own,
Yeah.
that might stand the test of time. Now, the book copy that I have is a 20th anniversary copy. It has an introductory note from you. And I love the part that you wrote in here where it said, there was a movie created and the book still exists. It's grown up, it's grown larger, and it glistens in a new way. And like I said, kids are still reading it today. And Nola has a question for you about that.
Hi, my name is Nola from Ford Middle School in Allen, Texas. My question to you is, since your book is used in classrooms across the U.S., what impact would you hope it would have on students like myself?
That's a very interesting question, Nola. During the pandemic, especially, I did a lot of Zooms with kids in schools around the world. The Giver has been published in, I don't know, 30 some languages. I got some here. This is Hungarian. I love the sled on the cover of this one, incidentally. Here's one that's Dutch. So all over the world, kids are reading the same book, either in their language or in translation. And during the pandemic, I found myself Zooming with classrooms around the world. Korea, Japan, Czechoslovakia. No, there isn't a Czechoslovakia anymore. The Czech Republic it is now. Spain, Turkey, Romania, lots of different countries. And what I found was that all the kids, ultimately, at the end of our Zoom, I would realize they were all asking the same question, no matter what accent they had or what school they were in what country. And the question was, how can we keep this from happening to us? How can we avoid doing this to ourselves, what the people in this book have done to themselves with the best of intentions? And so I guess that's the impact, in answer to Nola's question, the impact that I would like it to have, that it would make kids think about what the future is going to be like, but and in addition, and more importantly, how can they affect the future? Because in a very few years, they're going to be the guys voting for their governments, for what is going to happen in their own particular future. And they're going to have important choices to make, and they don't want to make the wrong choices, as the people in this book have done. I hope that's not a spoiler.
No, I don't think so. But speaking of spoilers, I know some of our teachers had requested for us to not share spoilers, but of course, we had a lot of questions that do have some spoilers. So if you were a classroom tuning in and haven't had a chance to finish the book just yet, now would be a great time to tune out and tune back in whenever you finish the book to get some answers to these need to know questions.
My name is Taylor from Ferristown Middle School in Kentucky, and I was wondering what was the hardest chapter to write emotionally?
I haven't reread the book in a while, and so maybe I would change my answer if I were to pick it up and read it afresh. But I do recall that there is a chapter in the book where Jonas's father kills a baby. And that was hard for me to write. You can understand why it would be. But in particular, it was hard because I had purposely created Jonas's father to be a good father, a good person, a caring person. He's the guy who is his name of his job is nurturer. He takes care of young babies. But the rules of the society are such that he is required at one point to kill an infant. And it's startling because good though he is and caring though he is, it doesn't bother him to do this. It's part of his job. So that was a very tough chapter to write.
We actually had some schools ask if they thought, the characters who do have to make some of those choices, if they even know that it is bad or morally wrong, or if that's just they've accepted that that's that part of their society.
Yeah, and that's when you begin to realize, if you haven't already, that there's something deeply corrupted in this world, that people have lost the ability to care.
Yeah. Now, I know some of the questions that I'm going to ask now might be answered a little bit if students were to pick up the rest of the quartet and read, but when you wrote The Giver, it's left a lot more ambiguous in the end. Berkmar Middle School, as well as I saw a live question come in from Carly at Mustang in Oklahoma. What happened at the end? What made you leave it so ambiguous?
I thought always that it was an optimistic ending and that Jonas and that baby were alive and well and had found the beginning of a new kind of life. So I was somewhat surprised when a lot of readers thought, oh, they're dead. And I can see how you could read it that way, and it makes for ambiguity. And then I decided I left it that way because I liked the ambiguity of it, and I liked the possibility for readers to make up their own ending. Sure. However, I discovered that readers did not like the ambiguity, and I got so many hundreds and hundreds of letters saying, what happened to them? And then eventually I did go on to write the 3 further books in which Jonas and Gabriel do appear, so you know that they're alive and well. In the 4th book, Gabriel is 14 years old.
Yeah, so students at Montgomery Knowles, I know you asked what happened to Jonas and Gabriel. They end up living, but did you ever think about what happened to the community that they leave in The Giver? What happened to the community there?
Yes, and that's a question I'm often asked, and I just kind of reply vaguely that they would have been healed by his what he did, and so they would have become a better world. Kind of vague. I do remember that when they were making the movie, they asked my advice about the ending, and I created a whole scene in my mind, which they didn't take. They didn't. It's not in the movie, but my suggestion was that it show children playing, and suddenly they would see a bird. You may recall there are no birds in the world of The Giver. And they don't know what it is. And then the bird begins to sing, and the children imitate the singing, and they begin to make music. And that's the ending. Not there in the movie, because although they listened politely, they did not take my advice.
Oh, interesting. Now, students could pick up the rest of the quartet. So what could they expect with the rest of the books in the series?
If they pick up the 2nd book, which is called Gathering Blue, and all of the series have a cover like this with a different title, of course, different characters shown. But the second book has a girl as the main character, and she lives in a different place. It's not the same world, because I began to think, what if instead of the world of the giver, where their technology has so advanced, what if there's another place where they have lost all that technology and they're very primitive? And that's the world that she lives in. But at the end of the book, it connects with the world of Jonas. Then the third book, and finally the fourth, takes all the characters from the first three and puts them together. And the main character, when I began to write it, was Gabriel, age 14. But I wrote a dialogue. It was opening the book, and he was talking to Jonas, who's now an adult, and he was saying, what about my mother? Didn't she want me? And the instant I wrote that, I thought, what about her mother? Would have been a birth mother, would have been a 14-year-old girl. And I went back and restarted the book, and she becomes the other main character. And the book is her search for that son who has disappeared.
Wow. Well, Lois, I could talk to you for hours about the giver and the rest of the quartet, but unfortunately, our time together is over.
Darn.
Readers, you can find The Giver, the rest of the quartet, and other books by Lois Lowry at your school or public library. And teachers, don't forget about the post-talk lesson and activity so that your students can compare how our society measures up to dystopian worlds. Until our next book break, happy reading.